Ecclesiastes chapter 9 through 12. We are finishing up our wisdom of vanity series tonight. And so we're finishing up the book of Ecclesiastes tonight. And so this evening, what we're gonna talk about this evening is we're gonna talk about these final things that the preacher talks about. Okay, Solomon. And what we're going to see is that by chapter 12, we're going to see that the style of writing is going to shift back to the author. Remember, I told you guys back when we started that there's not like full consensus on who the authorship is attributed to. Tradition holds that it is Solomon, and tradition and context clues point to it being written by Solomon. But through majority of the book, it's a direct speech from the preacher. You have these two different types of characters. You have the preacher and you have the author. And so for majority of the book, it's a direct speech from the preacher. But what we're going to see is at the end of chapter 12 is this summary from the author. And so what we've seen here is just Solomon pointing out that everything is, as he says, heaven. It's meaningless. And I just want to ask you guys real quick tonight. Did you guys ever wonder why I titled this series The Wisdom of Vanity? That never y'all never questioned that? Awesome. I love that I can title anything now and not have it ever be questioned.
Well, if it doesn't sound stupid, we won't ask. I mean, it's true.
I never have to wonder what Veronica's thinking. Ever. Never. I love it. So y'all really never wondered why it was called the Wisdom of Vanity.
It's like something. Most of what you're talking about is how everything is vanity and they're gonna have stuff like that.
Yeah.
So old. God, so sorry.
Yeah, we need some new Bibles.
Galen's dying. God, so sorry.
Do you guys know why it's titled Wisdom of Vanity? You gain more knowledge of what vanity is? It's a really good guess.
Because most of what this is talking about is vanity. Everything is vanity.
Wisdom.
Yeah, but why is it called Wisdom of Vanity?
Because wisdom is better than wisdom is better than weapons of war. Which meaning is wisdom is you're not smart, but you're more than smart. You just have that
meaningless.
No, money, no. It's like you got everything on the go. You're smart and you're like Albert Einstein, but you have that thing, those people.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you there, Veronica. You're overcomplicating it.
I don't know.
Blame what you got.
I'm so lost.
Didn't you say that he said that wisdom was vanity?
He did say that wisdom was vanity, but that's not why I called it the Wisdom of Vanity. Can I fill you guys in?
No. You told me.
Isn't that your job? I have a guess.
Isn't that yeah, it is
I
my
have a
job.
guess.
What's your guess, Miley?
That's the only thing you could think of.
Because that's the only thing I could think of. That's a very, very terrible guess. That's not the only thing I could have thought of. I could think of. I called this series The Wisdom of Vanity because of what we see throughout the book. What you see throughout the book is Solomon tries to find his purpose in wisdom. And he says, this is all vanity. He tries to find his purpose in wealth. And he says, this is all vanity. He tries to find his purpose and pleasure. Remember, he even says that he didn't even deny his heart anything that it wanted. He saw what his heart wanted and he took it.
Can't he be like, no, stop.
He could, but he didn't. He was looking for fulfillment and success and joy in these things. And what he came to the conclusion was that looking for success, looking for meaning in these things, in wisdom and wealth and pleasure, ended up all just being vanity. To the point where even he says that all life is vanity. It is the great meaningless. It is the great chasing after wind. Like, that's what he equates life to. He says, you know what? Life is the pinnacle of trying to catch smoke. The reason I called this series Wisdom of Vanity is because it is only when we truly see how vain everything else the world tells us to go after do we truly gain this wisdom that there is more. See, when we truly see that chasing after what pleases us, chasing after having lots of money, chasing after being the smartest person in the room, when we truly see that when we chase after those things, that there's always going to be someone who's making more money than us. There's always going to be someone who's smarter than us. There's always going to be someone who seems to have a better life than us, who seems to be more pleased with their life than us. It's like, have you ever seen, there's this cartoon, I've seen it on Facebook a few times, this like comic strip, and it's got a guy sitting at a bus station, and he's got a little thought, or it's got a guy sitting on a bike next to a car, and he's got this little thought bubble, and he says, man, if only I were to have that car, that'd be nice. You know, I'd be happy. And then next to him, sitting on the sidewalk at a bus stop, is a guy who's looking at him in the bike and is thinking, if only I were to have a bike where I wouldn't have to ride the bus, I'd be happy.
Everybody's wondering, like, what does it take for me to be happy?
Exactly. And it ends up just being this vain pursuit of chasing after happiness. And really what we're going to find out in these last verses, these last chapters, is that the preacher and the author, they're going to tell us that there is one thing that is worth our pursuit. There is one thing that brings full meaning to our lives. What you got, Veronica?
So, like, basically, like, say you got everything you ever wanted, you will never be happy for it?
Exactly. Because you'll never get everything that you ever wanted. Because you always want something else. You will.
Dang. Oh, that is hard.
You think, okay, I saw a headline today that says Jeff Bezos might become the first trillionaire in modern history. Okay? You think he's happy with $202.4 billion? No, he wants to have more. He wants to keep going after more.
He could spend that money on a toupee.
Honestly, though.
Like, there's hair transplants.
There's hair transplants.
Just get hair.
At this point.
But, like, you know, us looking at that amount, we'd be like, oh yeah, I'd be happy with that. But would we truly?
Brand new shoes.
When you get a lot of money, you would get fake friends though.
Huh?
When you get like a lot of money, there's always like people back behind you like talking.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
I wouldn't
You
want
got like your second cousin crawling out of the
Yeah,
woodwork,
yeah.
like, hey,
I wouldn't want any.
we used to spend our childhood together. I don't know you. Yeah.
Did you say you wouldn't want any friends if you were a trillionaire? Like,
Any new
not
friends.
trillionaire
Any new friends.
Hey, homie, did you just say you don't want any friends?
Your current friends would become fake. Cause like, there's a girl at my volleyball.
Exactly.
She's nice to us, but she's talking crap about this girl, but friends with them.
Sometimes you
But
say
that's-
things and it just takes me aback so much.
But that's the thing, like
Two-faced.
if we were to say, if only I were to have everything I would ever want, then I'd be happy. But we would never get to that point of having everything that we would ever want. There would always be more that we would want. And so, Solomon talks a little bit to this point. In chapter 9, he really starts off with this depressing realization of life. And in chapter 9 it says, "But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts, while they live, and after that they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward. For the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun." Solomon starts off chapter 9 by saying, what's the point of life? It's all meaningless. The good, the evil, they all die. The rich, the poor, the wise, the fool, they all die. He says it's pointless.
It's not at all.
He says, what's the point of life? The same event happens to all. The same event happens to all. Male, female, rich, poor, wise, fool, all die. And so he goes into this next speech. Y'all can read verses 7 through 10. We're going to talk about them. Y'all can read that on y'all's own time if y'all want. But he goes into this next speech. It seems to kind of contradict what he said before. So he goes into it and it's kind of like, since all die, since the wise and the fool and the rich and the poor and the wicked and the righteous, they all die, then and life is meaningless, then we might as well live it up now. He seemingly goes into this contradiction. You know, he starts with, "Go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do." But this is kind of like a sarcastic take from Solomon in this aspect. He's looking at this from outside of his under the sun premise, and we see him say, "Life is utterly meaningless, and our common death and destiny prove it to be so. So forget about all I have said and have a good time." Remember, he gathered people here to tell them where he found meaning. And he's told them that all life is meaningless, and he's told them, we can't find it in pleasure. And so yet here he tells them, you know what, since all life is pointless, you might as well live it up and find pleasure.
But he just said life is pointless.
Right, it seems contradictory, but it's really not contradictory. Okay? What Solomon is doing here is he is offering the smallest amount of hope that he can to the people that he's talking to. Yeah, he already told them life is meaningless, finding your meaning and pleasure is pointless, but he tells them, you might as well live it up. What he's doing is he's kind of offering them this small little glimmer of hope, and he's going to give them more hope later on. But he's giving them this small little glimmer of hope, and when we think of our situation as an under the sun premise, the best we can ever do is finding little bits of hope and finding little bits of joy in where we are right now. Live it up right now. Go ahead. order the double cheeseburger because you know what? You've only got one life to live. Who cares if you clog your arteries, right?
You will when you get older.
Right? Right? It's like
You know,
have any of you guys ever seen the comedian Gabriel Iglesias?
Yes.
Okay, he talks about like why he eats cake instead of working out, and he says, you know, why would I die sore when I could die full?
yeah,
You
you're
know?
hungry, like.
Well, he's like I could die tonight. Like, why would I go work out and die sore when I could eat cake tonight and die full and happy? You know, instead of sore and miserable. And when we think of this world as just limited to just this world, when we think of our life as just limited to this world, that's the best we're ever going to do. Maybe we find that release, that escape from reality for a little bit when the pressures of this world, the hardships, and everything else like are weighing down on us, and we find that little escape. But then once we get through that escape, we're just right back in the real world anyways. We're back where we're having to face those pressures, those stresses, those hard times. And like if you're a procrastinator and you go and you find your little escape and then you come back and like it's like, oh yeah, I've got this. Then it like becomes more pressure and like it ends up being more. So you're like needing an escape more.
What's a procrastinator?
Procrastinator? I'll tell you tomorrow.
Someone who keeps putting things off until the next day. Oh, what a procrastinator my mom is. That was me this week. I didn't want to clean my room. I have to do it after tonight.
Me washing my clothes.
You doing anything?
When you're an adult, it doesn't get any easier washing your clothes and not being a procrastinator. At least not in my experience. I don't know. Like, I can put clothes in the washer, Kelsey can put clothes in the washer, and in like 30 minutes, an hour, like we move them to the dryer, but then it takes like 7 to 10 business days to move them from the dryer and put them away.
You just reminded me that my
Yeah.
clothes are in the dryer.
Huh? I just reminded you that you have clothes in the dryer?
We got a new washer and dryer and they go do-do-do-do, every time that it finishes, and it's
That's
so cute.
so
cute. I know.
You should record it.
I will and I'll send it to you.
And so Solomon tells his listeners this sense that like if all we're limited to is just this world, then we might as well live it up. But the whole point of him saying that like looking for meaning and pleasure was vanity, it was meaningless, it was like chasing after the wind, was so that way his listeners would know that there's more beyond this. That there's more beyond just this world. And so it is a small hope given to despairing men and women, but it is the best that he can do. And so he goes on in Ecclesiastes Chapter 9, verse 10, he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going. Which is really harsh. But he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. We can take this verse and apply it to how we serve God. To do it mightily, do it boldly, do it with meaning, with gusto. Charles Spurgeon wrote or said, no man ever served God by doing things tomorrow. Meaning this idea of like, do whatever you're going to do it with might. This idea that we should apply to our lives, that we should do it and do it in such a hasty way that we do it today, that we don't wait until tomorrow, that we look for the ways that we serve God today, that we look for the ways that we serve God in this moment, that we look for the ways that we can follow after God's will right now. When Solomon tells his listeners to live it up and stuff, he is counseling them really more. Like I said, it is the only way that he can find happiness in the midst of all the vanity of life, even if it were to bring just a temporary joy. But we know that there is a deeper joy, a more lasting joy. We know that joy, that lasting joy, is found in Christ. We know that lasting joy is found in serving God. And then we get to chapter 10, and chapter 10 is a crazy chapter. Chapter 10 serves as a warning against foolishness. Chapter 10 is Solomon basically saying, don't be acting a fool, okay? He's saying, don't act stupid. He says, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. What we see is all throughout chapter 10 is this warning against acting foolish. The biggest fool thing that you can do is to be sitting in this room, listening to the Word of God, and refusing to acknowledge or act in it. The most foolish thing that anyone can do is not act as the Bible instructs, or not be the person the Bible has called them to be. To look at all of creation and say there is no God. To look at the human body and say there is no God. To do all this thing. The true fool says in his heart, there is no God. And this ruins everything. There's nothing beyond this life, and that we have to just get what we can when we are here and do what makes us happy no matter what. And Solomon gives a warning that even the smallest bit of foolishness will ruin everything. We've all faced that time in our lives where we've been faced with the temptation, and we've probably thought to ourselves, or have heard like this kind of lie of, well, it's just one time. It's just this once. A dead fly ruins the perfumer's ointment. I don't know how many dead flies it takes to overcome the smell of perfume.
Do dead flies even smell?
I have no idea.
That's what
I know dead crickets smell. I know dead crickets stink awful. They smell terrible. And I know that because every fall when I would go back to college, it was in the summer, there were always crickets that would find their way to Brownwood, and then they would just die off in the heat or something. And so in the evening, there would just be this great stench going throughout all the dorms and the downtown Brownwood and stuff. It was awful. Crickets smell, dead crickets, a lot of them, they smell terrible. Just so y'all know. They really do.
I've never smelled a dead cricket.
You will know when you smell dead crickets. You will.
No, I know what
Dead
it
flies.
It smells. I mean, it really smells like that. It is awful. It's terrible. But it's like a specific death smell. I don't know. Like, if we were to go outside and crickets were to be dead everywhere, I could smell it and I'd tell you, there's dead crickets everywhere. Like, it's a terrible, unique stench. But, I don't know how many flies it takes to ruin the smell of perfume.
It does take a lot of them.
It takes a lot of
It
them.
smells like a
Thousands.
dead person.
It smells like a dead
When
person.
have you ever been in this situation?
When you like have those things to collect the
Oh, the
tape.
fly tape?
Yeah,
The
it stinks
fly
so
paper?
bad afterwards. Not because of the tape or anything,
Mhm.
but the flies.
Because of the flies.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But, like,
I think Haley's
fly-
worse than that. I really do.
where is Haley? She was here earlier. Like, where has she been?
She's still.
She was downstairs. I even ate dinner across from her. She just skipped on youth.
She's downstairs.
She's downstairs,
Just
Look
tell
at
her
that.
you smell like a dead fly.
right?
It's probably for the best. So we don't have to smell it.
For sure. I think she knew you were preaching on her, or not preaching, but teaching on.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah,
She didn't want to be offended.
exactly. She knew it was gonna learn.
Flies aren't big creatures.
Oh, horse flies aren't.
Wait, but not flies. Horse flies, yes. Regular house flies, no. Okay. But here Solomon says, like, enough of them ruins the ointment. Ruins everything. He goes on, like, talking about acting foolish. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall.
Who?
Yeah,
A surgeon?
a serpent,
What's that?
a snake.
I thought it said serpent.
We saw a snake tail. This
Man,
is-
Butler's getting crazy.
The butler's getting crazy. But he says, like, even the littlest amount of foolishness is horrible. Guys, as you go through your life, you have to guard your heart against the foolishness of this world. That has to be something that as Christians we do. Paul writes in Ephesians to put on the armor of God. That's something we have to do every day. Christ reminds us to daily take up our cross and then come follow after him. Deny ourselves, take up our cross, and come follow him. That's a daily thing. And then chapters 11 and 12 set this tone of summary, especially the end of chapter 12. Solomon, as the preacher, talks about how it is not at all about us. He reminds us that what we do through our lives will be weighed and judged by God. Verse 9 of chapter 11 says, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment." And this serves as a sobering reminder to his listeners, to us, that God will judge us. The world will tell us, follow your heart, do what your heart says. Solomon reminds his listeners to, follow your heart, but make sure it's in line with God. Then verses 13 and 14 of chapter 12 says, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." Now this is the author speaking at this point, writing this down. "For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil." Here's the bottom line. There is a life after the one here on earth. Maybe you refuse to accept that. Maybe you have friends who refuse to accept that. The truth is, there is life after this one. There is. The question that we are faced with tonight, is when we stand before God, what will we tell him when he asks us, why should I let you into my heaven?
Because I said
That will not work.
like, no, you go.
Let me tell y'all, the answer, I was a pretty good person, will not be good enough. It won't cut it.
Because I know I sinned, but you forgive.
All things that were done will be judged, and the only way to have the evil forgiven is through the blood of Christ. Without it, none of us get into heaven. And all that's been strived for, all that's been worked for, all that's been pursued after, all the riches you gain, all the knowledge you have, all the pleasure you got, will be heaven. Let's close in prayer. Father God, Lord, we come before you tonight. God, we thank you for this time that we can be here, God, that we can hear your word. Lord God, I ask that you forgive us this evening for when we've sinned against you, God. Help us to walk forward in new life, God. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen. Thank you guys for being here tonight. Before y'all leave, if y'all could please stack up the chairs, but we're going to go across the hall and grab a chair and go down and take it to the fellowship hall. Then we're going to take a chair from the fellowship hall to the sanctuary. Okay? Again, I know, I'm sorry. Okay. That's what happens.